And it's time for a new segment here on Radio 13 called Clarion Connection. And it is with Ron Wilshire. Ron, how are you doing this morning?
Pretty good, Steve. How are you doing?
You know what? It is a Monday, and it's, Mondays can be either way. It's too early to tell as of now, though.
So it's early enough to try to make a Clarion connection. Right?
Exactly. And and there's a very interesting Clarion connection to start the series off with. And Ron, why don't you tell us a little bit about who we're going to be talking to today?
We're going to be talking to Clarion's resident ghost expert, Dr. Todd Pfannestiel. Everyone just calls him Dr. Todd to eliminate any pronunciation problems. And over the years, he's developed into a ghost expert for Clarion University and the Clarion community. And every year, guess what time? Halloween. He launches an annual ghost tour in the past, but it's grown in popularity to where it's a 3-night event, and it will be the 7th annual Clarion University Ghost Experience this year. And Todd, are you on the line?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay, and just to let the people at home know that that's not a ghost effect on the phone there, but Todd's calling us from Virginia where he's on business, and he agreed to talk about this. Todd, do you want to tell us a little bit how you got started on this?
Absolutely. As a history professor at the university, I help to advise a group of students who are interested in all aspects of history, and we always like to plan events. And whenever you hit late October, especially after the Autumn Leaf Festival, it seems that things quiet down quite a bit. And so we began searching around for various activities, and somebody mentioned they knew a lot of ghost stories from around campus. And so at that point, we began collecting those stories and said, what the heck, we ought to go ahead and share these with other members of the university community. And we started up the ghost event. It started as a walking tour, but then 3 years in, because of the weather and the unpredictability, as we all know, of Clarion weather and how cold it could be, plus some evidence we wanted to show on the big screen, some sounds and some video files, we moved it indoors, and as you mentioned, it's grown exponentially to 3 nights with over 1,200 people in attendance last year.
How do you determine which is just a story and which is real?
Well, that's always a tough one. We like to believe that there is something real about all the stories that we tell. And in other words, they start with something real, a real event from the past, which may or may not have paranormal activity associated with it. We do investigate the stories. I work with a number of various professional paranormal investigation societies that will come in and spend the night with me in various buildings. And so we basically take the facts of the story, we search for paranormal activity, and then we leave it to the audience to decide whether or not they're related.
I noticed on some of the cable TV channels they have the ghost investigations and that. What types of groups do you use to investigate?
We have a couple here from western Pennsylvania. Actually, there's one that's affiliated with one of my colleagues up at the university. We have the Pennsylvania Paranormal Society that includes Dr. Andrew Kett from the biology department, as well as a number of his colleagues as well. So we've basically invited anybody who has the equipment and has a desire to investigate. I try to arrange an investigation for them in one of the buildings. And then based upon the outcome of their investigation, we as a group determine whether or not to invite them back for another visit. So I have a lot of different groups, and they have the basic same equipment that you see on any of the television shows.
Great. What do you do when you contact a ghost?
When you contact the ghost? Well, it depends on their reply. In one case, we packed up and left the building because it was far too scary to stay.
Which building was that?
That would have been Hart Chapel. One of our very first investigations in the chapel resulted in, usually these investigations might last for 4 hours, 5 hours, or longer. But this particular one, it was rather quiet up until about the 3-hour mark, and then all of a sudden, all activity, as we'll say, began to break loose. And even the professional investigators who were there said it was the most haunted response they had ever seen. And as a result, everybody said, well, I think we're done. Let's turn on the lights and leave. So it kind of depends. It's real hit and miss. You do have some nights that you might be there for 6 or 7 hours, and you don't realize until you go back and review the evidence that you actually caught voices or caught something on film or on video.
Well, don't leave us hanging about the chapel. Do you want to tell a little bit about the story that involved with the chapel?
Yeah, I'll give a little hint on this one, although we encourage people to come out to this year's event to hear the full story. The chapel, we now believe, is probably active with a number of ghosts, but the one I think most people are aware of is the ghost of William, who was a young independent actor back in the 1930s who was trying to make a name for himself. And he performed at the chapel at the time that it was actually transformed from an old chapel really more so into the auditorium that we see today. And we'll simply say that his performance didn't go as well as he anticipated, and he was so distraught over his poor performance that he actually attempted to end his life in the chapel. He successfully ended his life, but in a rather tragic fashion, and as a result, if people come out to the event, they will hear not only how he ended his life, but all the activity that seems to center around his ghost, still haunting that building, wanting the applause that he never received back in the 1930s.
Todd, you tease. You're not going to tell us that. Hey, what? There was another interesting one that I'd heard a little bit about involving a kamikaze pilot.
Yeah, that one I'll give you the full story on. That's one we know is definitely based on some facts. This would be in Founders Hall, originally Old Science Hall, right next to the Hart Chapel Auditorium. And there was a professor who actually was a veteran of World War II, and then he taught at Clarion, actually taught anthropology up through the 1960s and early 1970s. While he was a veteran, while he was serving in World War II, he was serving on a ship out in the Pacific, which frequently came under attack by kamikaze pilots. And after one particular attack, he retrieved basically what might be a grotesque souvenir, and that would be the head of a kamikaze pilot who had perished in one of the kamikaze attacks. And he brought the skull back with him. I guess as an anthropologist, he was fascinated by this. Well, this skull remained in a bookshelf, a bookcase, up in Founders Hall for many, many years until the renovation in the 1990s. And after the building reopened in 1998, although everything else was put back in place, nobody could find the skull. The professor had long since passed away. The skull disappeared, and we believe that some of the sounds you might hear in Founders Hall could be this kamikaze pilot still looking for his lost head.
That's pretty neat. It's kind of interesting, too, that I believe during the Second World War, Founders Hall served as a training area for pilots. They had some type of simulation machines in there.
Absolutely, it certainly did. So there are some strong connections there. We still hear of a few other spirits that might haunt Founders Hall as well, so we like to believe that many of our buildings might have more than one spirit, and we're actually preparing for another investigation this next week, so hopefully the professional investigators and I will be able to tell you a little bit more about a building that we haven't really spoken too much about in previous visits.
Do you have any idea what causes ghosts? You know,
again, we like to say we leave it really up to the people who come to the particular events. I know there's a lot of people who believe that these are obviously disturbed spirits or disrupted spirits who still have reason to be roaming around in a particular building. In the case of Hart Chapel, obviously an actor who, where he ended his life quite tragically, is still seeking the adoration, still seeking the applause that he never received. Or in the case of the kamikaze pilot, seeking a piece of himself, literally, that has somehow disappeared or been left behind. And then ghosts tend to manifest, if you believe the investigators, in various ways, such as drawing upon energy, and this would include from light sources, from batteries, which is frequently during the investigations you'll find cameras which are fully charged will die all of a sudden, or lights will tend to turn on and off, including flashlights. Oftentimes in response to direct questions, you can get lights to turn on and off. And it's all about trying to draw energy from natural sources or normal sources that we have in this world in which they try to answer or try to manifest themselves.
I know in the past you've actually done tours, and I guess it's gotten so successful that you want to present in a chapel to as you mentioned before, to present evidence and things. When you did do tours, have you found any evidence of ghosts in the Clarion community?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, it's still amazing how many times I get phone calls from people in the community, whether it's people simply living in Clarion or whether it's merchants down on Main Street or in other locations, who have contacted me to tell me about, for example, the ghosts in the Loomis, both in the hotel as well as in the restaurant, ghosts further on down Main Street and in some of the newer merchants, but still the old buildings that they now reside in. There's the infamous ghost in the Fulmer house, which dates way back to when that was actually, I believe, a funeral home at one point, and then later on the Theta Chi fraternity house, and now the Fulmer antique house. So we've had some wonderful stories from people in the community, and I think that's what I enjoy the most, is that this is an event that goes beyond the university. And out of the 3 nights, we certainly have a large contingent of children and adults come in from the community in order to participate in the free event and share stories with us afterwards, so we might have future investigations as well.
Great. Any interest in reinstating more of a community-based ghost tour?
I think we would like to do that at some point. It's something that we never really intended at the start because we weren't sure how big the interest would be, and that's why we kind of limited it to the university. But I remember that first event 7 years ago when we had far more people attend than we ever anticipated, and we knew we had something sort of hot on our hands, that we began talking about reaching out to the community. And I have actually been working with some of the merchants down on Main Street to see if we could make this more of a week-long event where we might have a few nights at the university and have a few nights down through the community. Encourage merchants to stay open late as we bring groups through the buildings and find some way to learn about the stories that really permeate our whole community and not limit it just to the university.
If anyone is interested in following up on this, or if there are any ghosts listening, how would they contact you? Well, we know how the ghosts would contact you.
Yeah. The ghosts do well enough. They certainly find a way to get hold of me. If anybody wishes to contact me, they can certainly reach me up there at Clarion University. Again, I know my last name is far too long, as you mentioned. We worry about mispronunciation all the time. But seriously, if anybody even just called the university switchboard, or if they went to the university website and looked up Dr. Todd from the history department, well known enough that I think everybody would know how to get in touch with me, and at that point be more than happy to listen to their stories. Or if they believe they need an investigation at a particular location, I would work with my colleagues from the Pennsylvania Paranormal Society to see if we can make that happen.
Does this tie in with your work on Clarion History itself? I know you've been collecting information about the history of Clarion University.
Absolutely. In fact, we just celebrated our Founders Day just this past month, and we're aiming towards the big 150th anniversary, which is going to take place in the year 2017. And as part of that, I have the Clarion University History Project that, along with a great group of student volunteers and great connections with Clarion alumni, we've managed to collect all sorts of items and stories, oral histories. And part of that is the folklore. So certainly the ghost event plays into this in terms of trying to collect the rich history of Clarion beyond simple paperwork. We want to know all the stories, all the traditions as well. So this certainly will be a big piece of what we'll be producing here over the next few years. Looking forward to that 150th.
You have a pretty active history club. How does something like this benefit students? I mean, it's a lot of fun and everything, but how does it help them after they graduate?
Oh, it absolutely does. I can't even tell you the number of students who we've had graduate, whether it is with history majors or the secondary education social studies majors who go on and become teachers in our local high schools, that they remember the fun they have with these activities, and as teachers they start to plan similar activities at the schools they now teach at. Or in the case of our history majors, they really develop the interest in the Clarion History Project at large as a result of this ghost event, and like to maintain connections with our alumni, find out other stories and other traditions that they can learn from Clarion's past. So I think whether it's our students becoming teachers or our students moving on as history majors, that this, as you said, is a very fun event which stimulates that interest. And I also think when I give this tour, sometimes I do a special event with local high schools, that it stimulates some interest, and I hope even encourages some local high school students to possibly attend Clarion so they can be part of this in the future.